Hello, AP language testers. This is Mr. Everett, and I wanted to make this critical video in preparation for the AP language exam that you'll be taking remotely due to the COVID-19 virus restrictions. I decided to make this video because, as it turns out, we dealt in class with the argument and synthesis essays before spring break, but never got to the rhetorical analysis essay. I had planned, as I typically do every year, to save this more involved essay for the month or so leading up to the test. But as things turned out, social distancing measures required that we no longer hold class at school. So basically, the one essay that you'll be writing for the exam on May 20th is the one essay we never really covered with any great depth. So what we'll be doing in this video is covering exactly everything you need to be able to do well on this essay, from dealing with the prompt to writing a complete introduction to organizing your essay. From time to time, you'll need to pause the video and read the excerpt to get the full effect of the information in this video. Please do so. Don't skip the essential part of actually reading the writer's words, or the information that I'm giving you won't make any sense. Okay, so let's talk about this thing. And the prompt that I chose, because it is one of the shortest prompts, and that way we can get it all on the full screen, is the 2007 free response Form B. And what you'll want to do is open up this set of slides, look for a link to it below this video, and click where it says 2007 Form B prompt, open up the prompt, and so you have it to go by. I would actually even print it out and go ahead and annotate it, because that's what you're going to be doing on the test. You want to spend about 15 minutes reading closely and annotating, and that'll give you the remaining 30 minutes to write an awesome essay off of your annotations. Okay, so let's look at the prompt. This will be the only type of essay you're going to see this year. So the rhetorical analysis essay is all about talking about what the author is doing to persuade his or her audience. What's the message, and how does the author get it across? So, reading the prompt, the selections below are taken from a speech delivered in 1861 by Wendell Phillips, a prominent white American abolitionist. The speech, written near the beginning of the Civil War, when Northerners were debating whether to allow African Americans to serve in the military, celebrates the achievements of the Haitian General Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint Louverture was a former slave who led the struggle to liberate other enslaved Haitians. At one time, he was the most powerful leader in Haiti, which was threatened alternately by French, Spanish, and British armies. So that's important information that you can bring in that is going to give you the perspective of the writer. Very important to note who is speaking, what is their slant, what is their position, what are they trying to do. Don't blow off the background information that is given to you. Okay, now the actual prompt. Read the selections carefully, then write an essay in which you analyze the strategies that the speaker uses to praise his subject and move his audience. So the prompt is always, what is the speaker saying, and how is that message conveyed? Okay, it's going to be worded in a lot of different ways, but it's basically that. Okay, so on the next slide, we have the actual reading. I want you to pause this video and read it very carefully. Okay, so as you're looking at this thing and you're annotating it, what you want to look for are shifts, because each of your body paragraphs should be based upon a section that is set off by a shift, a change in tone or a change in subject matter in some way. So if you'll notice, I would say that the first paragraph is one section that I would deal with in my first body paragraph in my paper. Let's look at it. So notice the use of I, used quite a bit, okay? Just throwing that out there. Okay, now, when he mentions Napoleon, and he says, I should take it from the lips of Frenchmen who find no language rich enough to paint the great captain of the 19th century. he is appealing to the national pride of the French. And what he's doing there is he's about to set up a contrast between Napoleon and Washington versus Toussaint, okay? So this whole thing is going to be about contrasts. He moves on to do the same thing, and he's using pathos here. I would definitely mention pathos. Were I here to tell you the story of Washington, I should take it from your hearts, you who think no marble wide enough on which to carve the name of the father of his country. Again, appealing to the emotions of the audience. It's an ad populum appeal, and it is definitely, he's using pathos to gain the trust of his audience. So then he says, I'm about to tell you the story of a Negro who has left hardly one line. So that's a contrast to all the stuff that's been written on Napoleon and Washington. I'm to glean it from the reluctant testimony of Britons, Frenchmen, Spaniards, men who despised him as a Negro and a slave and hated him because he had beaten them in many a battle. So he's already starting to paint Toussaint as someone who is in some ways better than those he's just mentioned. But he's just setting it up, and he's not going that far yet. All the materials for his biography are from the lips of his enemies. So again, Napoleon, Washington, all written about by people who love these guys, versus Toussaint, and the only people that wrote his biographies were people who didn't like him. So even the people who didn't like him admired him, and that admiration is what he's going to continue on with and take it even further. Some of the devices you can talk about in terms of creating that patriotic appeal. The white marble, you've got a lot of imagery going on here, rich enough to paint the great captain. You have synecdoche, the lips of the Frenchman. You have anaphora, I am to glean, okay? And emphasizing himself as someone who is genuinely involved in promoting this man that many people have never even heard of. He speaks directly to his audience with second person you who think no marble wide enough, okay? Again, to create patriotic appeal, to connect with the audience. I am to glean it from the reluctant testimony of Britons, Frenchmen, Spaniards. Notice he's leaving out the expected and. So, of course, he's using asyndeton to make it more dramatic, what he's saying. Now, there is a shift here at line 15, and I would deal with this next set of the passage from line 15 to line 32 as my second body paragraph, and then I would save the rest of it for my third body paragraph. Okay, so in the second body paragraph that I would be writing, dealing with this chronologically, notice the devices. Toussaint forged a thunderbolt and hurled it at what? Notice the diction, hurled, forged. He's using powerful language to make associations between Toussaint and some sort of god. At the proudest blood in Europe, the Spaniard, and sent him home conquered, at the most warlike blood in Europe, the French, and put them under his feet. Notice he gives his independent clause and then adds prepositional phrases, long prepositional phrases, separated by semicolons, to basically catalog the great armies that Toussaint has sent home packing as they attempted to take over Haiti. Notice again the diction, warlike blood, pluckiest blood, skulked home. All of these things emphasize the greatness of Toussaint and the weakness of the armies that were the greatest in the world at the time. Then he brings in Cromwell. Now, if Cromwell, important English political leader, was a general, at least this man was a soldier. So again, we have the high versus the low, and the low prevails above the high. I know it was a small territory. It was not as large as the continent, but it was as large as that Attica, which the note tells us that that's Greece. which with Athens for a capital has filled the earth with its fame for 2,000 years. We measure genius by quality, not by quantity. So he recognizes that Haiti is not a huge country, but it's not about size, it's about quality. And he's paralleling the smallness of Haiti with the smallness of the historical relevance of Toussaint, and basically saying that size doesn't matter here. I would call him Cromwell, but Cromwell was only a soldier, and the state he founded went down with him into his grave. Okay, again, more contrasts between great men who have been written about extensively in history and Toussaint, who's been written about almost not at all, and only by those that he defeated. I would call him Washington, but the great Virginian held slaves. This man risked his empire rather than permit the slave trade in the humblest village of his dominions. Notice the ethos here. And the writer really is taking a chance because he's speaking to Americans who would have revered Washington tremendously. He not only calls out Washington for owning slaves, he contrasts him against Toussaint, who fought for the rights of slaves. Very significant attack on a reverent figure that he knows is not going to earn him many applause. Notice the applause here and here, but there's not much in the way of applause here. So he's taking a big risk in offending his audience to make a point. And we'll see what that ultimate point is once we get to the final paragraph of the essay. And this is where I would mark another shift when annotating this thing. Okay, so in my third body paragraph, I would begin here and deal with the last part. Now, he has risked losing his audience by attacking the fame of Washington. He got no applause. And then he says, he think me a fanatic tonight. So he's reading their minds. He wants to connect with his audience still. He's not trying to alienate them. You think me a fanatic tonight, for you read history not with your eyes, but with your prejudices. Okay, so he returns back to second person speech, and then he begins to catalog various heroes, some of them lesser known in history, again to make parallels with Toussaint. But 50 years hence, when truth gets a hearing, notice the personification here. The muse of history will put Phocion for the Greek and Brutus for the Roman, Hampton for the England, Fayette for France, choose Washington as the bright consummate flower of our earlier civilization, and John Brown, the ripe fruit of our noonday. And here's where he's gained his audience back. Thunders of applause. He knows he's speaking to abolitionists. He knows his audience. And bringing in John Brown, who would basically sacrifice his life, very much an extreme abolitionist, to say, hey, here's small people that have done great things. He's still making those parallels with Toussaint. Then dipping her pen in the sunlight, again, more personification, to create that pathos, will write in the clear blue above them all the name of the soldier, the statesman, the martyr, Toussaint Louverture. So he has gained his audience back, and there's lots of applause. And notice some of the devices he uses. Again, a synditon, the soldier, the statesman, martyr. Okay, there's no and here that like would be expected, and that makes it more dramatic. Again, returning to his use of pathos to make his point that this man deserves far more adulation and praise than many of the great names that have come through history. Okay, one thing I'd like to note before we go into how to write a perfect introduction for this kind of essay. Keep in mind that you are expected to be able to discuss how the author uses language to convey meaning. And that could involve using the names for various schemes and tropes, rhetorical devices, figures of speech that you find in the work. But you need to understand that this isn't a test on whether you know these words or not. Students have gotten perfect scores on this essay without knowing any of these words. They simply discuss what is happening in the text, describing what is happening, and discuss how it creates meaning. So in this text, for instance, we find anaphora. But if you don't know the word anaphora, that's okay. You're just saying that the author repeats words at the beginning of multiple phrases and clauses, and you describe the effect of his doing that, emphasizing the word at the beginning of each phrase, for instance, creating a dramatic effect. Asyndeton, where he leaves out the expected and. But if you don't know the word asyndeton, that's okay. Just say that he leaves out the expected and or conjunction to make his tone more dramatic. Mesodiplosis, where you repeat words in the middle of phrases to set up parallels. You don't have to know that word to be able to describe what the author is doing. So really, ultimately, you're looking for repetition. You're also looking for opposition, like you would find in antithesis, where words are opposites that are often placed in similar places and phrases. You just describe how it works. You don't have to know the word antithesis. Again, you can make a perfect score on this essay without having to know these words. It helps to know them, but you don't have to use them on the essay. So if you'll just notice what I have on this screen here, you do have a number of the devices that this author uses to create the appeals, the pathos, ethos, logos. And you have to find evidence for how that author uses or creates those appeals. And that evidence is in the details of the devices that the author uses. But again, you don't have to use the word for the device. You only have to explain what's going on with it. Okay, now we get to the introduction. I think the introduction is the most important part of the work. Too many students want to gloss over an introduction and just write whatever and get to the body paragraphs. But if you set up a strong introduction, then you will have a strong essay, because the rest of your essay is just a matter of proving what you said in the introduction. And the mnemonic device that I teach students to use for this is picture two parrots dividing purple poker chips. If you can get these things into your introduction, they don't have to be in this order, but this is a pretty good order. If you can get all this into your introduction, then the rest of your paper is just going to flow very smoothly, as long as you're providing evidence to prove what you're saying. That said, the AP graders aren't real fans of what they might call formulaic writing. They may consider this a kind of formula. Well, so much depends upon how you word things. And if you can make it your own, be creative with the way you present it. If you can get these things into your introduction and write 2 or 3 solid body paragraphs, then you're golden. And you may not even get to the conclusion. I would even say that conclusions are optional in this essay. You have so little time to write it that, as it is graded as a rough draft, the writers recognize that the time is limited. And conclusions don't add anything new anyway. Typically, a conclusion just restates what you've already stated and leaves a concluding thought. That is not necessarily needed for this essay. I would not say that it's not needed for all essays, but in this particular situation, this timed, quick essay, you can leave off an introduction, and if you've written a good essay, then you're fine. Okay, so what goes into an introduction for the rhetorical analysis? If you can remember this mnemonic device and what it stands for, then you should be able to write a solid essay. The first part is picture. What is the big picture? What is going on in this work? What is it basically about? And then tone. You want to mention the speaker's tone and how that tone may shift in the work. Paraphrase. What is the speaker saying? So paraphrase, summarize the major points of that the speaker is making. Devices. You'll mention some devices. Now, if you don't know the names of these devices readily, you can describe them or allude to them. Just uses a number of devices, and you can explain later in your body paragraphs. Point and purpose. What is the point? The point is the thesis. What is the statement, the one statement that the author is making in this work? Narrow it down to one sentence. What's he saying? And purpose, why is he saying it? Who's his audience? Who's he trying to convince? What is he trying to convince them of? And that is your introduction. So going back to this prompt, let's look at the big picture. It's the overall image the speaker is painting. In this case, I've written, the speaker praises Toussaint, a former slave turned virtually unknown hero of the Haitian people. You could be more specific than that. And you do find a lot of good information for the big picture right here in this opening information. That is the big picture. Put that into a sentence. Okay, next thing you want to get into that introduction is tone. Use tone words. What is the speaker's attitude toward his subject? That's the tone. Laudatory, praising, bold, and he shifts to brazen and audacious. Parrots stands for paraphrase. What is the speaker saying in your own words? The speaker begins by drawing parallels between the Haitian general and the heroes of his audience and of history, but then brashly puts his subject above them. Okay, that summarizes what he does. Dividing is devices. What are 3 or 4 controlling devices does the writer use? In this case, it's not a poet, but what are the major devices, some of the major devices? You can bring in diction's always one of them. And don't just say he uses diction. He uses strong diction, he uses ironic diction, give it an adjective. Okay. Analogy, antithesis, and ellipsis. Again, if you don't know the names of these things, just describe how those devices are structured. You could just say he uses repetition, opposition, and strong diction. And elaborate further in your paper. Purple poker chips. Point and purpose. Purpose and point. What point is the author making, or the speaker? What is the speaker ultimately trying to do, achieve, or emphasize? So what I've written here is in an attempt to convince his audience of the importance of allowing African Americans into the American Army, Wendell Phillips attempts to convince his audience of the heroic nature of a man left unmentioned in their biased histories. So here it is all together with each element of this mnemonic device brought into a full paragraph. You may want to pause and read that again. Okay, let's move on to the first body paragraph. So I mentioned that I emphasize with students that they should write chronologically, dealing with the piece, dividing it by tone shifts. That could be one paragraph, and you're dealing with that in your first paragraph, or it could be two paragraphs before you see a significant shift. Wherever those shifts are, that's the signal to start writing your next body paragraph. So divide it into 2 parts, divide it into 3 parts. Let's look at the first body paragraph that I've written here. Wendell Phillips begins his address by drawing analogies for his audience between Toussaint and a handful of national heroes such as Washington and Napoleon. In doing so, speaking in conversational second person, I should take it from your hearts, Phillips attempts to convince his audience that among such distinguished historical figures stands an unknown who has repulsed the nations of these noteworthies in their attacks on the Haitian people. His fervent diction emphasizes Toussaint's role of underdog, one despised and hated, yet who had beaten them in many a battle. Phillips uses anaphora, I should take it, where I hear, I am about to tell you, I am to glean it, further to convey his dramatic and laudatory tone regarding his subject. Notice I've put in parentheses my evidence in quotes. I've put snippets of quotes as evidence. I've woven my quotes in. I've also mentioned using the language of the discipline of English, things like analogy, second person, fervent diction, anaphora. Again, describe these things if you don't know what they're called. But you need to weave your quotes in to your thoughts. Also, use elaborate sentence structures. How many sentences do I have here? 1, 2, 3. I have 3 sentences, but it's fairly lengthy. And you want to show that you own the language with your diction, elevated diction, college level diction, but also with a variety of sentence structures. Okay, I'd like to convey some final thoughts. Since you're not going to be able to, or may not be able to print out the prompt and annotate, normally we would say, okay, take the prompt, take 10 or 15 minutes to read it carefully and annotate for shifts, devices, make little notations on the prompt regarding tone and meaning and all of the things you're going to say in your essay. On this, I call it the COVID-19 exam. Because of this situation, you may not be able to annotate like that. Consider reading everything just really carefully, making notes for yourself in terms of the elements that go into a solid introduction, and then simply begin typing out your essay. So since you're typing it, you can go back and add things as you go. Keep in mind, this exam, all the AP exams this year are open notes. So you can have notes with you on what goes into the perfect intro, as we went over, and various things. You could have a list of devices that are commonly found in these essays, and even the definitions with them, so that you can use the terminology if you want. Just don't expect to Google anything, because it would likely take a lot of time to do that. And it's really good to have everything ready before the exam begins. So all the notes that you're going to need for writing a rhetorical analysis essay, what goes into a perfect introduction, all of that, and an open Google document for typing out your essay prior to pasting it and loading it into the College Board website. So be totally ready to go when you go in and begin that essay. Thanks for watching, and good luck.